So I unabashedly like third-party creators and independent creators simply because they make the things that make your table special from a table who's playing the same adventure path, the same campaign, the same scenario that you are. But it is these little things that can make it special and can bring extra things into your table and into your play that you like to do with your friends. So I was approached by Alan Tucker to go ahead and preview The Eye of Everywhere, one of his new projects that is done with a really good creative team. So my name is Don. I'm trying to be the sly strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So, just to kind of introduce the team behind The Eye of Everywhere, it is basically Alan Tucker. Alan Tucker had done the module The Light of Shark Teeth Cove, which I've already reviewed and I loved, as well as a bunch of other supplements on DM's Guild, Pathfinder Infinite, and Drive Through RPG. Another one of the creators is Sen H.H.S, who you might remember from a little book that might be called, oh, I don't know, Rage of Elements and The Summer That Never Was Adventure Path. Some of the other creators that are on here are the Emmy Award winning Kirsty Kidd, as well as Micha Watt and Charlie Ho. Now, when The Eye of Everywhere was first brought to me, my initial thoughts were that it was going to be a good bridge with Starfinder was just announced, the second edition that's going to be compatible with Pathfinder second edition, but not coming until 2025. And that this would just be something that could kind of tide everybody over. But it was really good timing because, there's a thirst for that. However, it is way more than anything having to do with that. It is that, or it can be that if you want it to be, but that is just a very small part. It is a homebrew creator type dream for a GM that wants the party and the adventure to not be tied to a setting, to a theme, or to a long term campaign that could be used also to take a campaign that is feeling stale and use this as a vehicle to bring in other elements in order to just kind of brighten up the game again. You could take a group that just finished Abomination Vaults, a really, really traditional dungeon crawl that would like to stay together and launch them into really anything you want. You want political intrigue? Stay in Scalera. You're bringing a group from the Fist of the Ruby Phoenix? Well, you could have maybe a mysterious patron or a deity. Go ahead and bring them into the Abettors League and Perm's Pit of Pain and Pleasure. Do you want to combine your ideas with maybe like a good third party module or subsystem, like maybe Vote Finder, into this adventure in order to kind of liven everything up? What Eye of the Elements actually is, it is a perfect jumping off point for a multiverse theme campaign. Or, you know what? It could be just like High Helm, and you could create an adventure that occurs entirely within the Eye of Everywhere. I've kind of teased a bunch of little concepts, but let's go ahead and get into a little bit more specifics. So, what is the Eye of Everywhere? Well, it's a massive, really entirely unique portal that spans the multiverse or multiple universes, allowing maybe some ships and some things to transport through. Its appearance is it resembles a swirling 200-foot wide sphere of energy with random purple and crimson streaks, which I thought was a really good description of it. And in my own particular head, I kind of think of it as a purple and crimson black hole. There's a bunch of traffic within it. Is a thriving port in and of itself that maybe the normal people don't know about, but if you do know about the Eye of Everywhere, it's bustling with continuous arrivals and departures. It has a really interesting thing that once you immediately come into the portal and anywhere around the portal itself, it has air but no gravity. So for movement, you pretty much have to navigate pretty easily flying or swimming through the air, while others who don't have the normal adaptations in order to zero gravity would struggle and require assistance. And you know what? I'm sure there's some type of business where they take newcomers, maybe for a really, really high cost, and transport them where they want to go. Now, Scalera itself, the city, is really a large ring of buildings, streets, parks, and homes that are located just beyond the portal. The and pretty much everyone who lives there just refers to the Eye of Everywhere as the Eye. Now, there is gravity on the ring itself, and the upper and lower structures on both sides are called law and chaos, basically denoted by the two poles, and they reflect the dominant factions. The city zones are divided into these individual zones, and they're controlled and policed to, as you would expect, varying degrees by the factions that operate within the eye. And there are 12 factions. And we kind of get a glimpse in this preview document into basically three of them. I'll say two and maybe the law. Now, within the eye itself, there are small moons and constructs that float above and below the actual city ring itself. So it gives it additional places to go aside from just being on the ring. And there are some enormous structures, two large structures near each pole of the portal that house the wardens and their followers. And we'll get a little bit into the wardens here in a second. For transportation, there are various flying vehicles that connect to these fortresses, the city, and the portal, as well as all the moons and all the little ancillary structures that occur within the eye. And the population is in the thousands, but an official count is impossible due to constant traffic in and out. And it is this element of constant traffic in and out that really enables various tabletop role-playing styles. And to use basically the description from the preview document itself, you can be a wizard on an alien bug hunt in deep space. You could be a tough space marine rescuing a kidnapped prince in the Fey realms, or you could be a rogue hacker who's handy with knives. One of the cool things about it is it introduces a mechanism where technology and magic can conflict, and in some cases, you won't be able to use certain things depending on who else is in your party and who else is around. It's a pretty unique concept in my mind, at the very least. Now, in the preview document, we're kind of introduced to some basic features of the eye and some basic unique rules that are going to apply, and they are controlled by the wardens. Now, the wardens are an ancient group that kind of holds all the power over the portal. You can think of them as like the administration or maybe the hegemony within the Eye of Everywhere. They're the top authority for the Eye of Everywhere, but they don't appear to be involved into the day-and-day running and life in Scalera. It is believed they might be as old as the eye itself, and perhaps they were the creators themselves, but there's no concrete proof for either claim. What's certain is pretty much if you want to get inside or outside of the warden and get to a specific place, only the wardens have the codes for using the portal to reach specific destinations. Now, some of the rules that the wardens do kind of rule over are a travel restriction. The only way to travel between planes is through the eye itself. Other methods don't work. You can't teleport in, you can't do things like that. Inside Scalera, teleportation usually works, but is restricted in some areas, like maybe the Institute and many buildings in the halls of commerce to prevent theft. Now, what is the Institute and what actually goes on in the halls of commerce? I guess we'll have to wait for the Kickstarter to end to find out. As far as travel using the portal, anyone who enters the portal without a specific code is sent to a random destination across the multiverse, often resulting in instant death. You might wind up finding yourself in the center of a sun or maybe in deep space with nothing around you and no way to get anywhere. These codes are imprinted using a device similar to, and I think this is a fantastic idea, similar to a forehead thermometer operated by warden-approved administrators. And typically, you would have to go through the factions in order to get a code request in, but individuals can also make requests, which might take quite a bit longer depending on the destination's popularity and maybe your own reputation. That I'm not certain of. And then one of the most interesting things, especially when we get into the Abettors League later on, is there's minimum damage. So any damage causing effects, doesn't matter whether it's spells, doesn't matter whether it's weapons, doesn't matter what source it's from, will always deal the minimum amount of damage with all damage dice rolling a 1. So if you have an attack that does 1d6 of damage, you're going to do 1 damage. You have an attack that does 66 of damage, you're going to do 6 damage, and that's the max that you can do. Now, we talked a little bit about the factions, but let's go ahead and bring two that we kind of have some good explanations on, and that would be the Envoys of Saga City and the Abettors League. There are 12 factions overall, and each one have their own goals, methods, and benefits that you can get. So the Envoys of Saga City are pretty much androids, mechanical robots. You can think of them that way. They don't particularly like the term artificial intelligence simply because, in their minds, intelligence is just intelligence. And making it sound artificial is something that maybe organics would use because of their ego. And their specific name that they would use for it is techint to describe inorganic intelligence. What their main mission is basically to protect and guide inorganic sentient beings. And they kind of do this search and do this transport using the eye as their base while they search for more of their kind across the multiverse. And they also have a military branch called Saga City's Hammer within the Envoys. And that is causing a bit of concern, maybe a bit of friction among other factions, including one that we get the name introduction, but not too much more about it, but called the Axiom Organica, which the name itself just implies that it is going to be organic life. The Envoys' leadership insists that they are expanding their peacekeeping force due to their spread across the multiverse. Now, if you're not part of this faction, to those on the outside, it's pretty unclear whether Saga City is actually real or it's just a concept. Most of the members are mechanical, and there are some cybernetic hybrids that are transitioning from biology to machinery, and they also will employ organic beings for routine tasks. And it's possibly kind of to mirror how some organics view mechanical things as tools. Well, they want to kind of show that organics can be tools to mechanics. Their goals are to eliminate distinctions regarding intelligence. To them, once again, it's just techint is what they are, and there's nothing artificial about their intelligence. Now, there are some aggressive factions within this faction. Their methodology is pretty much they defend inorganic entities showing signs of awakening and collaborate within their own order to reinforce laws on how machinery should be treated. And one of the things I really like about this preview document, specifically for this specific faction, is it lets you know what some of the faction benefits are. So Envoys of Saga City members can use faction dice for acrobatics and crafting skills. You get the following benefits as well. At 4th level, you get something called flexible expertise, which means they can add a faction die to any skill check once per day. At 8th level, you get something called chosen field, which they can become an expert in a skill they are already trained in. And at 12th level, they can get something called logic is as logic does, and they become immune to illusions and charm effects due to their commitment to logic. And then another faction we're introduced to is called the Abettors League, which I kind of thought was a really good description. So the Abettors League is led by the renowned Soren gladiator Traxel Sunhaven, and Sorens are enormous Tyrannosaurus humanoids, which actually you can find on Archives of Nethys if you look. It's a highly influential faction in the Eye with a whole bunch of knowledge about all the other factions. Now, the League has agents and contacts across the entire multiverse, and they're always ready to provide muscle when needed for a price. So you can think of them sort of like mercenaries. However, they've recently faced some difficulties with contracts are drying up, and they've had to sell assets to stay afloat. So there's already some political intrigue already introduced with one of the factions. And it really makes for, to me, an interesting story that you could do a whole little thing just within this one faction. And then there is even some mention of some points of interest in the Abettors League territory, and two specifically. So the Two-Eyed Cyclops, which is basically a fantasy-style tavern sprawling 6 stages with performers and musicians and things going on. And it really kind of made me think in my head when I read the description as being almost like one of those Star Wars type taverns, but in a fantasy setting. And then the one that I thought was really fantastic, especially when you consider how damage is modified within the Eye of Everywhere, Perm's Pit of Pain and Pleasure. And it's basically for those seeking more excitement than just food or entertainment. This place has anything you could want to find. And in the Eye's protective environment, these gladiatorial fights that we were talking about are popular, but Perm takes it up a notch. And they basically hold a big battle royale, free for all battle in that main pit, and the last person standing gets to enjoy Perm's offerings until the morning for free. And it caters to a bunch of different desires and fetishes and anything you would want to see. So there's even some intrigue just within this one establishment, within a faction, within an area. So there's a lot going on. And you basically get a breakdown of the politics and possible seeds for your adventure, as well as notable personages in the organization and within the territory. So, just within these two factions, you can see a good breakdown of everything that is going on. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the document itself. So, here's one of the fantastic things. So, I received this preview document, but once you go to the Kickstarter, you can see the same preview document as well. So, one of the first things I want to show is that this is going to be Pathfinder compatible as well as compatible with 5th edition. There will be two separate versions, and you can choose either one that you want to do. Each one of these documents is going to be approximately about 100 pages. There's going to be a player's guide and there's going to be a GM guide. Now, I kind of don't want you to think of this, at least in my impression, that this is an adventure path or a campaign. It's not. This is a setting. Think of this almost as a high helm type book, except you get a player's guide and a GM guide, so there is some separation. I actually love the idea. And as you kind of scroll through the document, once again, you'll see all the names for the credits. You'll see it's done under the orc license, at least the Pathfinder side, and the people who contributed to this particular document. And you're also going to see that there are a bunch of developer notes. Once again, this is a preview document, not a final. So this will be Pathfinder 2nd Edition remaster ready when the final edition is released, as well as Creative Core for the 5th Edition service reference documents. And there's a bunch of notes within, both about Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons 5th Edition, if you want to take a look at it. We have new classes, new ancestries, faction, lore, gear, and more. And we'll kind of go ahead and go through most of that. So we have a preface, which once again kind of introduces you to the particular content itself. One of the things I kind of do want to point out is, just like with most Pathfinder documents, is we have this little element on the right-hand side that lets you know where you are in the document. Get a description of the eye itself, what's going on, a little bit more about it, as well as how to form a party. There are some introduction to the factions, and I introduced those kind of in the first section here, but we have the Wardens, a small little section on that. The Envoys of Saga City with a good description of what's going on with them, as well as I love this little rumor down here that Saga City is a supercomputer controlled by the Wardens that stores and issues code required to enter the portal. And since they don't necessarily talk about what Saga City is outside of the faction, or heck, I don't even know, maybe not within the faction, that's just an interesting rumor to go through. Then we go to the Abettors League, and you can see a picture of Traxel right here, Traxel Sunhaven, who was the Sorin leader of the Abettors League. And to me, this document seems really well thought out, really laid out very well as a preview, so you can kind of see what you're going to be getting into. One of the things I do want to point out is when they show the two factions for the Envoys of Saga City, you get the goals methodology as well as the faction benefits, but the description is a little bit short. When you get to the Abettors League, the description is super long. It tells you more about the territories they control. Once again, the points of interest we were talking about, the two-eyed Cyclops and Perm's Pit of Pain and Pleasure. Also the politics, also the adventure seeds, also the notable personages, but it doesn't necessarily show the same things as in the goals, methodology, and faction benefits, although I'm sure it's going to be there for both. But you kind of get to see two different sides without getting everything in one shot. It's a great thought for a preview document, and it kind of shows you what you might expect to see once we actually get the final documents. New Ancestry. This is one of the ancestries they're introducing, and this is a Kakti, which is a new ancestry. I hope I'm pronouncing that well. Once again, it's a new ancestry, and I have not heard it spoken, so I'm going to call it the Kakti. But it is a insectoid type ancestry, And it's laid out just like most other ancestries, and largely it seems to make sense. Once again, I'm not going to go over every single part of this document simply because you'll be able to view everything in here yourself, but just to kind of show you what's in it. So we have the same type thing where it is laid out exactly like a ancestry would be in the core documents, letting you know how you might act, how others are going to view you, a physical description. Cactis are 5 feet tall or less, their bodies are sturdy. You have the amount of hit points you get, your size, speed, languages, traits. One of the things I thought was really cool, and I felt it kind of went into a little bit more detail than I was actually expecting because it's not something I would have thought of. But you have an extra set of limbs which can be used as arms or legs. Although they don't have as much precision or power as your primary limbs, you can use these limbs to take interact actions while your primary hands are otherwise occupied. That's going to save you half an action, full action at times, as well as they get dark vision. But I do like the attention to detail on it. And then we get into the classes that we are going to be introduced to. We're going to see the Scion here in a second, but there's also the Astravant, which sounds fantastic. In addition to the Astravant gains and curates their powers through a special deck of cards. I like the theming of it. I like the actual component side of it a bit because as we just saw from one of the updates for the player core is that they're kind of getting rid of spell components. Well, this kind of gives you a little bit in order to gives you a good theme and a good flavor for a class. But we're going to get an introduction to the Scion itself. So the Scion is kind of what you think is they're basically dealing with mind powers. They can create effects that other magics and technology can't really mimic that well, but there is a price to their power. And I love this particular element, and we'll get to it in a second. But the other thing I really like is it's a constitution based class. So I like that introduction. Hit points 6 plus your constitution modifier. So they probably aren't going to be your frontliners. Once again, telling you what they're going to do during combat encounters, telling you what they're going to do in their social encounters, which I kind of love, which you might bend others to your will, gently persuading them, sticking to the shadows while observing. So there are things you can do. You're basically going to be the intelligence organization within your group. What you're going to be doing when you're exploring and what you're going to be doing in your downtime. Everything kind of here makes sense. Saving throws make sense, but it is laid out just like a class would be in any of the major books. Now, we do have the full Scion advancement structure, which once again makes a lot of sense, and a description of how others would view you, some of the things you might do, and some of the class features. And once again, I'm not going to be going through all of them. However, I love how they break down, even in this preview document, basically what the disciplines of the Scion are. And for me, like the one that makes the most sense to me on the main classes is a rogue because they have the different types. This is very similar. So you have the bender, which basically light, space, and time are your playthings. You can also manifest dimensional energy into allies who fight for you. Sounds fantastic. Biomorph, living things grow and flourish and wither and die by your power. So you can also manipulate your own body. So you might be able to do some type of enforcement magics as well. Mentalists, these are basically what you would think a mentalist is, which is the mind, particularly others' minds, are your purview. And you gain glimpses into the future. And then the mover, which means you can move objects and create constructs of force through your strength of will. So these would be more your telekinetics. Now, the other thing I really like about this is the manifestations of your power. So you can either choose one of these to be what happens, or you can literally roll the dice. But personal exertion manifestations could be anything from you bleed from your nose, eyes, or ears, veins bulge in your forehead, temples, or neck, or cuts or scratches appear on your skin, or your skin wrinkles and withers, and or hair turns gray as if temporarily aged. So it gives you some really good flavor components. And once again, just to kind of point this out, one of the last sentences here when we're talking about it is these manifestations fade after you stop using your abilities. And they talk a little bit about Scion spell casting. I'm not going to get too far into that, except for pretty much talking about something that I love the implementation of, which is stress and stress thresholds. Kind of explained up here in this box. Stress is accumulated each time you use a talent, which the talents are generally speaking the spells for a scion, and your stress threshold is equal to your fortitude saving throw modifier. And once you've exceeded that stress threshold, the stress you accumulate is taken from your hit points and reduces your maximum hit points by that same amount until you get a full 8-hour rest. So I love the fact that you can overcharge your psionic abilities, but you do it at a price, and the price is very well defined. I think it's a really great mechanic. It also tells you going through how to reduce that stress, heightened talents and spells, cantrips, and your talent repertoire, a little bit more into the disciplines themselves. And then we talk about the feats. I keep saying this a little bit, and only because I don't want this to go too long, because the document is available for anyone who wants to view it. We aren't really going to be going through all the feats themselves, but I really did kind of like reading through them. I liked how clear everything seemed to be. And then we can go through and we can see what the full talent list is, even if we can't see what every single one is. And then we kind of get into the spells that can be used by other classes with the Scion trait. Things like Extra Pocket, which is a small space to store something so it's always handy, kind of like your own personal little bag of holding, which I thought was really a fantastic one. And then you can also do things like a sort of healing, an invigorate, which you basically send positive energy to one creature and they receive 5 temporary hit points. And until the start of your next turn, have a +1 circumstance bonus to fortitude and will saves, which I thought was really interesting. And it can be heightened as well. So there are things that other classes can use if they can get the Scion trait. So I actually love that very, very much. Then we go so far, we can see a little bit of gear, and one of the best gear things I saw. So there is new armor. Once again, and these are things that are specific to the Eye of Everywhere itself. I love the idea of energy ablaters. Energy ablaters, and there's various ones of these, but the big thing to point out is you can kind of see right here, basic energy ablaters gain resistance to the type of energy they are created for. So these are things that opposed to being pure on shields, they give you resistances. And I actually love that particular thing. I love that particular aspect of it. But there are shields and weapons that you can use, things that you would generally think of, general firearms, energy weapons. And we have pictures of what these things might look like, as well as augmenting gear, things like sights and overcharge models. And as you might think in a technology rich environment, you're going to be using energy packs, and these devices will override the energy pack's normal operating regulator in order to allow you to kind of overcharge things at the cost of the battery packs not lasting as long. And full description for the overcharge module, as well as kind of an eye into what might be coming up, things that you can see. And here's that one thing I was talking about before, which is an optional rule. But if you want to lean into the idea that magic can follow up technological devices, you can use this rule in your games. I actually love this rule, and this would be one that I would think of implementing as long as it wasn't too punitive to the party. But if you roll a 1 while operating an item based in technology, determine if a spell was cast or a spell effect occurred within 30 feet of you since you took your turn. If so, you roll a second d20, and if the result is equal to or less than the rank of the spell magic that was cast, the item you were using breaks. The GM can determine whether it is repairable with any parts or tools you have at your disposal. I kind of think that that is a fantastic way to bring in the conflict of magic versus technology. And I just love the idea. There's just so much that brings to the table for flavor. I love that kind of stuff. We can go on through more lists of equipment that you can get, as well as, and here's something that's kind of good for both the Pathfinder players as well as the 5e players, is we see a creature, and the creature is an Ungra, and the Ungra basically, I don't want to confuse the word, but it mimics a stone until you do something like try to mine it. And then all of a sudden, whoa, the creature is going to come up. So we have what that creature would look like. And here it's a creature 3 for Pathfinder 2nd edition. However, if you go down a page, you're going to see this same creature in Dungeons and Dragons 5e format. So you can kind of get a look at what each one looks like. I am super looking forward to this Kickstarter. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that. So, talking a little bit about the Kickstarter. So, there are going to be digital as well as print tiers available, both for Pathfinder 2nd edition as well as 5th edition. In general, the digital Kickstarter pricing will start at $19 each for both the player's guide and the GM guide, and then $29 for both. And then the print editions will include the PDF in addition to the print. And you can get $29 each for softcover versions or $49 to buy them together. And go to the Kickstarter itself to see what the hardcover pricing is going to be. But I think it's a really good price for what you're actually getting. Now, one of the other things I wanted to say is early, within the first 48 hours, print edition backers will get a set of dice along with their book. So that's kind of your bonus for being an early adopter. And the delivery of these are scheduled for spring, early summer of next year. However, Alan Tucker did mention that he has done Kickstarters in the past and has delivered early. That's not a promise. That's not anything like that. However, it is just something to keep in mind. And once again, this preview document that we went over, it's available to you right now. So I really, really hope that you go and take a look at the Kickstarter yourself and decide for yourself. I will say this, I am going to be backing this particular Kickstarter because it's just such a vehicle for a bunch of other adventures. Even if you just want to do one little foray into it, or you can base a whole campaign off it and just have your party do the wildest things. It just sounds like it could be a lot of fun. Now, one of the things I'd like to mention here, sometimes people they see a Kickstarter or they see something like that and they think, well, I'm not sure if I really want to do that because Kickstarter doesn't mean you're 100% going to get it. I can't guarantee anything, and I don't think anybody can guarantee anything. However, this is a creator that I've reviewed in the past. They do deliver what they have done in the past. So I am 100% sure that I am going to be backing it because it just seems like such a cool thing. I can't think of anything else to say on closing for this. I can't think of a better summary. This just seems like a really cool concept to me. So that's my summary. I'm backing it. But I do hope you like this independent creator preview. I do love to do these things. And I'll just to say this one last thing one more time. Remember, it is the third-party creators that take your Abomination Vaults or your Fists of the Ruby Phoenix or your whatever, and they make it different from other tables, Fist of the Ruby Phoenix or Abomination Vaults. Not that there's anything wrong with the original Adventure Pass, but this allows you to bring new stuff in. And I love working with independent creators and the things that they bring to the table. So I do hope you like this. And if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.